And now, for this week's State of Trade in Star Citizen. Last week saw the historic surge in trade continue, as many haulers have scrambled to reclaim their funds. Mainstream commodities such as titanium and astatine were stretched to their limit, as lack of decent supply continues to plague the trade lanes. With the cargo refactor announced for the far-off patch of 3.18, here's hoping that CIG is willing to up supply rates as a temporary fix until the said refactor is introduced. Ships filled with scrap continue to gather dust in hangars, as CIG has yet to address their previous hotfix that shuttered the only port purchasing scrap. Scrapyards and even some drug labs are currently not detecting ships for trade, leaving many ships tied up with cargo in ports. As Port Olisar was the only working location for selling scrap, this was the second week that the commodity has been forced to stagnate. The Intergalactic Aerospace Expo is now underway. Both new ships and old are available to fly, try, and buy at the Tobin Expo Center in New Babbage. There is also a free fly event for prospective players to try out the game. Players who buy Star Citizen before December 1st and use another player's referral code will receive a free Argo MPUV, the space forklift of Star Citizen. While limited in use, it is hard to turn down a free ship. During the Aerospace Expo, don't forget that all ships will be available to rent and use on their manufacturer's respective days. This means that all players can take advantage of some of the largest currently available haulers. Pay attention to Tuesday, November 23rd, for access to the C2 Hercules, which hauls an impressive 696 SCU. Friday, November 26th will also offer Drake Interplanetary's Caterpillar, the original bulk hauler. Keep in mind that trade lanes will be packed, so plan accordingly and pay attention to your surroundings. And now for market data. In the metals market, Agresium saw a minor dip in pricing. Agresium has a rarely seen base price of 22.50 and sells for 27.50. Around ArcCorp, Lyria's SAL2 fell slightly to 23.07, down from last week's price of 23.85. In Crusader, Daymar deposits followed suit. Kudra ore fell to 23.96, down from last week's 24.43. ArcCorp 141 saw a minimal drop to 24.75, down from 24.77. In Microtech, SMCA8 on Calliope fell slightly to 24.62, down from a previous 24.67. Clio's Cantwell followed at 23.55, down from last week's 23.59. Aluminum saw no notable movement as the commodity holds little interest for traders. Aluminum has a base price of 1.11 and sells for 1.33 UEC. Prices held at base numbers across the board. Gold saw more movement as many traders took to it as an alternative cargo. Gold has a base price of 5.41 and sells for 6.41. While deposits around ArcCorp and Hurston held to their base pricing, deposits in Crusader continued their usual surge due to a low refresh rate. Kudra ore on Daymar reached 5.63, up from a previous 5.50. Shubin SCD1 held to 5.87, slightly down from last week's 5.89. Microtech saw similar pricing to Crusader, with Calliope's Caltag reaching 5.84, up from last week's 5.50. SMO18 on the planet itself rose slightly to 5.43, up from a previous base price of 5.41. Titanium saw a slight dip in pricing on Thursday, most likely due to the patch debut refreshing stock. Titanium has a base price of 7.10 and a sell price of 8.90. Pricing has, however, surged once again, with low stock issues across the board. Around ArcCorp, Lyria's SAL5 had a low of 7.56, down from a previous 7.93. SAL2 on Lyria had a similar 7.63 pricing, down from last week's 7.95. Humboldt Mines surged to 7.97, up from last week's low of 7.54. Around Crusader, Sellen's Tram and Myers held to 7.97, up from last week's 7.85. Around Hurston, Ariel's Bezdek and Lathan mirrored each other in the 7.77 range, with constant fluctuations. However, average prices for both were lower than the previous weeks. Around Microtech, Clio's Cantwell repeated last week's price of 7.98. Titanium sees the most supply issues around Hurston, so seek alternative routes before visiting Ariel. Tungsten continues to see minor traffic. Tungsten has a base price of 3.55 and sells for 4.06. Around Crusader, Daymar's ArcCorp 141 fell slightly to 3.60, down from 3.64. Schuben SCD1 on Daymar also fell to 3.69, down from a previous 3.80. Around Hurston, Ariel's Bezdek saw a minor bump to 3.57. Around Microtech, Caltag on Calliope reached 3.79, up from last week's 3.68. SMCA8 on Calliope fell to 3.69, down from last week's 3.75. All other locations held to base pricing. Legal Vice sees distilled spirits surging once again. Distilled spirits has a base price of 4.06, with a sell price of 5.56 at major ports. In Crusader, Gillette Family Farms on Sellen had the lowest price of 4.63, slightly down from a previous 4.66. Terra Mills on Sellen and Bountiful Harvest on Daymar repeated last week's price of 4.66. Around Microtech, Bud's Growery on Euterpe had the overall lowest price of 4.57, down from last week's high of yet again 4.66. With increased traffic from the IAE, distilled spirits will continue to be in short supply with high pricing. Stems saw typical movement last week. Stems have a base price of 2.80 and sell for 3.86 at major ports. In Crusader, Deacons on Yela fell slightly to 2.89, down from a record 3.02. Hicks on Sellen actually fell to a base price of 2.80, down from last week's 2.88. In Microtech, McGrath on Clio rose to a record 3.07, the highest price we have observed for stems. Anvik on Calliope fell to 2.83, down from last week's 2.93. It appears that Sellen should be the destination for anyone looking for stems throughout the week. Gases repeat last week's surge. Astatine sees heavy movement at all outposts once again. Astatine has a base price of 7 and a sell price of 9 at major ports. Around ArcCorp, Walla's ArcCorp 061 had the lowest observed price of 7.04. ArcCorp 056 dipped to 7.32, down from last week's price of 7.61. On Lyria, Loveridge fell to 7.66, slightly down from last week's 7.7. Around Crusader, Yela's ArcCorp 157 held at 7.95, close to last week's price of 7.92. Benson Mining on Yela fell slightly to 7.85, down from a previous 7.93. Around Hurston, Woodruff on Ida repeated last week's price of 7.88. Ryder on Ida fell slightly to 7.84, down from 7.87. Both locations experienced regular supply shortages. Around Microtech, SMCA6 on Calliope fell slightly to 7.83, down from last week's 7.89. On the planet itself, SMO10 and SMO22 matched pricing at 7.86, higher than last week's. Astatine continues to see supply shortages at all locations, and should be avoided by bulk haulers for the time being. Chlorine saw a minor slowdown on movement. Chlorine has a base price of 1.3 and a sell price of 1.71. Around Crusader, ArcCorp 157 on Yela saw a high of 1.41, still down from last week's 1.45. Benson Mining on Yela fell to 1.38, down from last week's price of 1.41. Around Microtech, Calliope's SMCA6 fell slightly to 1.41, down from 1.43. For sell locations, Deacon's on Yela fell to 1.69. All other observed locations held to a sell price of 1.71. Fluorine saw a repeat of surging movement once again. Fluorine has a base price of 2.35 and a sell price of 2.95. This week, all locations fell to a base price of 2.35, save for minor bumps. However, the sell price continues to falter. Grimhex and Anvik were the worst offenders once again, reaching into the 2.70 range. This repeats from last week. Deacon's research saw the same, with an observed sell price of 2.72. However, Hicks on Selen was observed having a base sell price of 2.96. The same was observed at McGrath on Clio in the Microtech system. The ease in movement to these locations may be attributed to haulers seeking alternative routes now that their funds are beginning to recover. Hydrogen saw little movement last week. Hydrogen has a base price of 0.90 and a sell price of 1.12. ArcCorp 157 on Yela continues to be the only anomaly in pricing, holding at 0.96. All other locations held to a base price of 0.90. Iodine sees no notable movement. Iodine has a base price of 0.35 and a sell price of 0.45. The commodity continues to hold little interest for traders. In the mineral market, Beryl continues to see surprising movement from 3 locations. Beryl has a base price of 4.06 and a sell price of 4.35. Around Crusader, ArcCorp 141 on Daymar held to last week's pricing of 4.12. Kudra Ore on Daymar rose to 4.14. Around Microtech, Calliope's SMCA8 fell slightly to 4.13, up from last week's pricing of 4.15. Corundum saw minor movement at one location. Corundum has a base price of 2.30 and a sell price of 2.71. Tram and Myers on Selen saw the price of Corundum rise to 2.39, up from last week's base pricing. This can most likely be attributed to returning players remembering Tram and Myers for its former glory days of trade. Diamond sees increased interest in the Hurston system, but prices in other systems dipped slightly last week. Diamond has a base price of 5.85 and a sell price of 7.35. Around ArcCorp, Walla's 045 sees a high of 6.16, down from a previous 6.43. ArcCorp 056 followed at a similar 6.14, down from 6.42. ArcCorp 048 sees a minor dip to 6.03, down from last week's 6.28. On Lyria, SAL5 fell to 6.08, down from its previous 6.33. At Crusader, Tram and Myers fell to 6.52, down from last week's staggering 6.85. Hurston's mini deposits surged as well, with Han and Perlman on Magda reaching 6.25 once again. On the planet itself, Edmund was at 6.41, up from 6.03. Operai fell to 6.05, down from 6.23. Pinewood reached 6.41, up from last week's 6.31. Thetis surged the most to 6.33, up from its base price from last week. Around Microtech, Deltana on the planet itself fell to 6.20, down slightly from 6.25. SMO13 fell to 6.18, down from a previous 6.34. Diamond continues to be in short supply at all locations. Laranite sees typical patterns and continues its well-known shortages. Laranite has a rarely seen base price of 25 and a sell price of 31.01. Around ArcCorp, ArcCorp 045 on Walla fell to 27.05, down from 27.40. ArcCorp 056 on Walla fell to 27.49, down from 27.81. In Crusader, Tram & Myers rose to 27.67, up from its previous price of 27.35. Around Hurston, Bezdek on Ariel repeated last week's 27.73. Its sister location, Lathan, fell slightly to 27.59, down from a previous 27.82. Quartz sees no notable movement. Quartz has a base price of 1.25 and a sell price of 1.55. Medical supplies follow Laranite once again in extreme pricing and minimal supply. Medical supplies have a rarely seen base price of 15.75 and a sell price of 19.25 at major ports. Around Crusader, Deacons on Yela reached 17.32, up from 17.19. On Selen, Hicks reached 17.24, far above last week's 16.74. In Microtech, Anvik on Calliope rose to 17.39, up slightly from 17.32. On Clio, McGrath rose to 17.37, high above last week's 16.97. Processed food sees no notable movement. Processed food has a base price of 1.21 and a sell price of 1.56. Scrap is still unavailable for trade. Scrap has a base price of 1.35 and a sell price of 1.86. Until CIG rolls back their previous hotfix, scrap cannot be sold at any location in-game. Do not purchase scrap until further notice. Agricultural supplies see no notable movement. Agricultural supplies have a base price of 1 with a sell price of 1.20. And now for next week's forecast. With the IAE in full swing and a free fly event until December 1st, expect the trade lanes to continue to be saturated. Gold is still decent from Aberdeen and Lyria, and a round-trip run of processed food to an outpost with agricultural supplies will make comparable profits to Florine, but without the demand issues. For example, Gillette Family Farms to Hicks Research and back. Expect November 23rd, 24th, 26th, and the 27th to be especially taxing when it comes to trade, due to the 48-hour availability of the C2 and Caterpillar. And now for this week's trading tip. Explosions? They're more common than you think. If you find your ship randomly exploding shortly after landing, this is sometimes caused by ship geometry such as landing gears or elevators colliding with a landing pad. While this can't be avoided at stations or hangars, you can minimize the chance of exploding at outposts. Consider landing on terrain instead of on landing pads. That's it for this week's State of Trade. Until next time, keep on trucking.